Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take the sources you send our way, pull out the key insights, and hopefully give you some fresh perspectives fast.
Make you the most informed person at the coffee shop, basically.
Exactly. So today, we're getting into urban development policy, specifically looking at New Rochelle, New York, based on a webinar you shared.
Right, that was from the Better Cities Project. Had some interesting folks on it. Salim Firth from the Mercatus Center, Philip Wharton, a developer with Twining Properties, and the mayor of New Rochelle, Noam Bramson.
And they kick things off asking, what's the typical state of play for urban development policy in the U.S.? Let's dig in there.
Well, the first thing that jumped out, particularly from Salim Firth, was this heavy reliance on targeted economic incentives.
I mean, like tax breaks for specific companies?
Yeah, exactly that. Cities trying to lure, the next big factory or headquarters by offering subsidies. He mentioned places like Lordstown, Ohio.
Oh, yeah. The whole GM and then Lordstown Motors situation there. Didn't exactly pan out smoothly, did it? Despite all the money poured in.
Not really. And Winslow, Maine was another example. Cities chase these big wins, offering tax breaks, subsidies, you name it.
But does it actually work? Does it create lasting growth?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Salim's point, backed by research he cited, is that often it doesn't. You don't get the broad organic growth or those spillover effects everyone hopes for.
It's like hoping one big company will magically transform the whole economy.
Right. And yet cities keep doing it. Why? Well, Firth suggested a couple reasons. One, there's a whole consulting industry pushing these deals.
Makes sense. Their business depends on it.
And two, politically, it looks good, right? Announcing a big win, cutting a ribbon. It feels like progress, even if the long-term impact is, let's say, debatable.
So the alternative, which New Rochelle seems to represent, is maybe thinking broader. Less about specific companies, more about the overall environment.
That seems to be the shift they made, yeah. Focusing on overall demand within the city, which brings us nicely to the developer side of things, with Philip Wharton.
What were his main hurdles?
He immediately pointed to resistance to change, especially around housing density. The classic Airbnb phenomenon, not in my backyard.
Oh, definitely. People get very protective of their neighborhoods.
Hugely. He mentioned homeowners have, well, both financial and emotional stakes. And he gave this example of proposing just 4 houses on 4 acres in some suburban town, and the reaction was just intense.
Wow. 4 houses. Yeah, that tells you something.
It really does. And Wharton argued that the traditional way cities approve projects one by one, each requiring separate, often contentious reviews, just makes things harder. Every project becomes a fight.
So incentives might look appealing short term, but Wharton's saying they don't fix the fundamental issues.
Pretty much. He acknowledged incentives can, help on the margins, maybe bridge a gap. But for real, sustainable growth, you need those deeper long-term reforms within the community itself.
Like fixing the underlying process?
Exactly. He even brought up the Amazon HQ2 drama in New York City. Massive incentives are on the table, but local opposition and process issues ultimately killed the deal there. It showed incentives aren't everything.
Which is a good transition to Mayor Bramson's perspective. He's the one actually navigating all this on the ground.
Right. And he stressed that as an elected official, you have to listen to residents' concerns. Things like strain on infrastructure, schools, traffic. Those can be very real issues.
Absolutely. You can't just dismiss those worries. People need reassurance that growth will be managed properly.
Right, for sure. The government needs to show it's taking those concerns seriously, planning thoughtfully, ensuring the benefits are shared equitably.
But there's a but, isn't there?
There is. Mayor Bramson also pointed out that you can't always wait for complete 100% agreement on everything. Sometimes you need the political will to move forward with a plan you believe is right for the city's future, even if some people disagree.
You have to lead. Essentially.
And he felt that sometimes seeing the positive results of development can win over some of the initial skeptics.
Okay, so that sets the stage perfectly for what New Rochelle actually did. How did they innovate?
The big shift, according to the mayor, was moving away from those project-by-project battles. They invested heavily, up front, in public dialogue.
Okay, dialogue about what?
About the city's future. What kind of place did they want to be? What were their shared values? They worked to get agreement on a broad vision first.
So establish the ground rules, the overall goals, before any specific building plans were even on the table.
Precisely. And then, because they had that shared vision, they could create a development process that was much more predictable and streamlined for projects that actually fit within that vision.
Taking some of the political heat and uncertainty out of each individual approval.
That was the goal. Make it more attractive for investors who aligned with the city's plan.
So tell us a bit more about New Rochelle itself. What's the context here?
Well, Mayor Bramson described it as being just north of the Bronx. Pretty diverse, demographically, and in terms of land use, different types of neighborhoods. And it has great transit access, Metro North Rail, Amtrak.
Sounds like it has a lot going for it.
It does. But that was the paradox. For decades, the mayor said, downtown New Rochelle just hadn't lived up to its potential. It didn't have the shops, the restaurants, the housing options people wanted.
Why not?
The feeling was the risk-reward ratio for investors just wasn't right. The approval process was seen as cumbersome, unpredictable, and maybe the market felt a bit marginal compared to, say, Manhattan or other big regional hubs.
Okay. And Salim Firth added some demographic context.
Yeah, he pointed out it's pretty typical for the wider NYC metro area, but crucially, housing costs are high. Like median rent for a two-bed around $1,650, median home price near $780K.
Yeah, that's steep.
He described it as sort of a secondary hub, not a primary job center itself, but a place for local commerce, lifestyle amenities. He compared it to places like Silver Spring in Maryland, maybe Fort Lauderdale, Florida, even Rock Hill, South Carolina, or Murfreesboro, Tennessee, in terms of being desirable places facing growth pressures.
So fundamentally a good place to be if you could just unlock the development potential.
That seems to be the idea. The desirability was there, but the barriers were too high.
And this became really clear after the recession, right? Mayor Bramson mentioned they were still stuck.
Yeah, even when the broader economy recovered post-2007, development in New Rochelle didn't really restart. And this was despite using the standard tools, TIFs, tax abatements.
So the usual bag of tricks wasn't working?
Nope. The conclusion they reached was pretty stark. There just wasn't enough investor interest because the perceived risk and the barriers to entry were simply too high.
Which loops back to what Philip Wharton said developers really care about. It's not just about the incentives.
Right. He emphasized the entitlement process, that whole journey of getting permits and approvals. The certainty, the timing, the cost of that process is often paramount.
More important than a tax break, potentially.
In many cases, yes. Developers look at the history of development in a place, the market opportunity, sure, but if the approval process is a long, uncertain, expensive nightmare.
It kills deals.
Yeah.
Or, as Wharton noted, it means only the really high-end luxury projects can possibly pencil out because they need those higher margins to absorb the risk and delay costs.
Exactly. Which might not be the kind of broad development a city actually wants or needs.
Okay, so this is the problem New Rochelle needed to solve. Let's get into the specifics of their solution, launched around late 2015. It sounded like a multi-part strategy.
It really was. Mayor Bramson laid out several things they did, kind of all at once. First, an internal look at publicly owned properties.
Okay, what could the city itself bring to the table?
Right. Then, they actively marketed those resources to find a master developer partner, and that's how RXR came into the picture.
A big reputable firm? That must have sent a signal.
Definitely. Getting RXR involved signaled to the market that New Rochelle was serious and this was a real opportunity. But it wasn't just the partnership.
What else?
Two really big planning moves. One, they adopted a form-based zoning code for the entire downtown. We're talking 300 acres.
And remind us, form-based code focuses more on the physical form, building shape, placement, how it meets the street, rather than just separating uses like commercial or residential.
Exactly. It gives developers clearer visual and design guidelines up front. Much more predictable. And the second big move, they undertook a generic environmental impact statement, an EIS, for the whole planned downtown build-out.
Whoa. And EIS usually happens project by project, right?
Right.
And it can take ages and cost a fortune.
Correct. Doing one comprehensive EIS for the potential build-out of, I think it was around 7,000 housing units and 12 million square feet total, was a game changer. It basically pre-cleared a major environmental hurdle for any project that fit within that overall plan.
How did they afford to do that? The zoning and the EIS?
That's where the RXR partnership was clever. RXR essentially paid for the creation of the form-based code and the generic EIS.
In exchange for what?
In exchange for enhanced development opportunities on those city-owned properties they identified earlier. So RXR's investment effectively subsidized this crucial planning groundwork for all other developers in the downtown.
That's smart, leveraging a private partner to create a public benefit that lowers the barrier for everyone.
Very smart. And the results, as Philip mentioned, were pretty dramatic. Something like 30 projects approved in just a few years, a bunch already built and leasing, many more under construction.
A total turnaround from the stagnation before.
Absolutely. And Salim really emphasized that it was the coordination of all these pieces, the public land, the master developer, the form-based code, the generic EIS happening together.
Any single piece might not have been enough.
Probably not. It was the package deal. Plus, that prepaid EIS apparently had a time limit associated with it, which created a sense of urgency for developers. Get in while the getting's good, you know?
Yeah, makes sense. And compensating RXR with property opportunities instead of direct cash also seems key.
Yeah, Salim highlighted that. It aligned RXR's incentives with the overall success of the downtown plan. If the whole area thrived, their property values would go up. Win-win.
So, Philip, you were at RXR during this. From the developer seat, what was so appealing about this package?
He said the clarity and certainty were huge. The form-based code told them exactly what they could build, height, bulk, etc. The bonus system for providing community benefits was transparent.
The menu of amenities idea. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, apparently through community listening sessions, they developed a list of things residents wanted, like historic preservation, green building elements, affordable housing, open space improvements. Even a black box theater came up.
Okay.
Developers could choose from this menu. If you included, say, affordable housing or renovated a historic structure, you could get a density bonus permission to build a bit bigger or taller.
And it was transparent, not some backroom negotiation.
That's what Philip stressed. It was clear. Provide amenity X, get bonus Y, no special deals needed. Everyone knew the rules. It created a level playing field.
What if adding a physical amenity didn't work for a project?
There was apparently also a cash-out option. A developer could make a payment into a fund instead, and the city could use that money for other community benefits. He mentioned a public plaza getting rebuilt using this framework.
So it channeled private investment towards public priorities in a predictable way.
Seems like it. And Mayor Bramson added they're still refining it, looking now at things like environmental and social governance, ESG climate justice, workforce development, maybe deeper affordability. So it's adaptable.
Okay, but even with this great plan agreed upon up front, development still means change, construction, disruption. Mayor Bramson, how did they handle the ongoing public reaction?
He was realistic about it. He said, yeah, once the cranes go up, people will naturally have opinions, concerns, sometimes objections. That's normal.
So what's the strategy then?
His approach was to constantly remind people of the process they'd gone through, the vision they'd collectively agreed on, and the long-term benefits they were aiming for. Acknowledge the disruption, but keep pointing to the bigger picture.
While also recognizing that some folks just fundamentally oppose growth, no matter what.
Exactly. You listen, you address legitimate concerns, but you also stick to the plan that had broad support initially.
Let's touch on the finances again. Were there any specific tax incentives left in this new model?
Mayor Bramson said yes, they still have a uniform schedule of incentives, mostly to stay competitive regionally. But crucially, he said these are generally less generous than the kind of bespoke, one-off deals they might have done previously.
Because the streamlined process itself was a major incentive.
That seems to be the thinking. Their confidence wasn't really in the tax breaks, but in the idea that the sheer volume of new development would generate significantly more tax revenue overall, benefiting the city and the schools, even after accounting for new costs.
And they had that fair share mitigation fund, too. How did that work again?
Right. That was a separate thing. Developers pay a one-time fee, calculated based on their project's size and impact. That money goes directly into a fund for capital needs infrastructure, schools, parks related to the new growth.
So developers know the cost up front, and the city gets dedicated funds for infrastructure.
Yeah, it creates predictability on both sides. He mentioned it had raised something like $20 million already, which is pretty substantial.
And the results really did blow past expectations, didn't they?
They really did. Philip mentioned the initial plan aimed for maybe 5,000 new housing units over 10 years.
They got
7,000 units approved in just the first 4 years.
Wow. And are people actually moving in? Is there demand?
According to Mayor Bramson, yes. The projects that have been completed are leasing up incredibly well, like over 90% leased. So the demand was definitely there, waiting to be unlocked.
Okay, Salim, stepping back, What are the big lessons here for other cities? Maybe even for places like Deer Park, LaPorte, Pasadena, down here in the Houston area. What's replicable?
His number one takeaway was sound zoning is the foundation. Get that right first. Predictability is key.
More important than just throwing money at developers.
He argued yes, focus on creating certainty in the rules rather than just relying on financial deals. He gave Akron, Ohio as another example, where they offered tax abatements on all residential improvements, creating certainty and equal treatment, not picking winners.
Because developers manage risk, and uncertainty is a huge risk.
Exactly. Reduce the uncertainty, make the process clear and faster, and you'll likely attract more investment, maybe even at a lower public cost, because developers aren't pricing in as much risk premium.
Philip added a point about political context too, didn't he?
Yes, that New Rochelle was smart to focus its major overhaul on the downtown, which was underperforming anyway. They didn't initially try to force massive density changes into stable single-family neighborhoods, which would likely have generated much fiercer opposition.
So, strategic focus matters. He also contrasted it with what he saw as a flawed model.
Right, the model of creating huge regulatory barriers and then trying to overcome those self-inflicted wounds with massive subsidies. He mentioned Kansas City as possibly falling into that trap sometimes. It's inefficient.
Mayor Bramson, painting a picture of New Rochelle today. What does it feel like?
He talked about the visible change, the skyline transforming, the sheer level of investment being unprecedented for the city.
Growing pains too, presumably. Construction noise, traffic.
Oh, for sure. He acknowledged the disruptions, but emphasized the general optimism about where things are headed long term. The next big challenge, he said, is translating the new buildings into vibrant street life, a downtown core people are really proud of. He called it an unfinished process.
When did construction actually start? Was there a lag after 2015?
No, he said it began almost immediately, with RXR kicking off their first project quickly.
And just to clarify, RXR's specific deal on the public land, it wasn't the whole downtown, right?
No. He explained they got exclusive rights to acquire certain city-owned parking lots based on a set formula, and importantly, they had to replace or preserve the parking. It was only a portion of the overall 300-acre zone.
And that term ministerial approval came up. What does that mean in practice?
It basically means if a project checks all the boxes defined in the form-based code and the generic EIS, it gets approved administratively by city staff within a set time frame like 60 or 90 days. It avoids the project having to go back through multiple political votes and potential choke points as long as it meets the pre-agreed standards.
That seems huge for developers. Speed and certainty again.
Absolutely.
Has this New Rochelle model attracted attention elsewhere? Are other cities trying it?
Philip said yes, definitely. Lots of interest, especially from cities that feel they have market demand but are choked by their own regulations. He felt the tangible results in New Rochelle, the buildings actually going up, helped overcome skepticism.
But it might not look exactly the same everywhere.
Right. He suggested variations are possible. Maybe a university, a hospital, or some other anchor project could play the role RXR did, helping to fund the upfront planning reforms in exchange for their own development certainty. It depends on local assets.
Looking back, Mayor Bramson, anything New Rochelle would do differently or is planning to improve?
He felt the basic framework really worked, but he mentioned incorporating more around ESG, environmental and social governance, into future updates. And maybe thinking about enhanced architectural review, just ensuring the new buildings meet a high aesthetic standard.
And Philip, broader lessons.
He really emphasized the power of genuine public-private partnership and just the sheer benefit of simplifying overly complex zoning. Get the big picture vision agreed upon first, he said, then let the process work for projects that fit the vision.
Salim seemed genuinely excited by this stuff.
Yeah, you could tell he finds it rewarding to see policy changes lead to real, positive physical changes in a city. He sees New Rochelle as proof that proactive policy not just being vaguely pro-development, but actually fixing the underlying system is crucial, especially in high-demand areas where the market wants to build if you let it.
You mentioned another example, too.
Auburn, Maine, another city he highlighted for implementing modern zoning, like a form-based code, and interestingly, getting rid of parking requirements downtown.
That's a big move.
It is. He did caution, though, that sometimes cities adopt form-based codes for the buildings, but keep really restrictive use regulations, like saying exactly what kind of shop can go where, and that can kind of defeat the purpose, stifle the flexibility.
One last point from him.
Yeah, something maybe overlooked. The strategic placement of key public facilities, like schools, Putting them downtown can be a powerful organic driver of economic activity.
Fascinating. Okay, so wrapping this up, New Rochelle's story really does seem to offer a powerful alternative model. Instead of just chasing smokestacks or headquarters with tax breaks, they focused on fixing the fundamentals. Clear upfront planning, a predictable, streamlined process, and aligning development with community goals.
It was systemic change, really.
Exactly. And for our listeners right here in Southeast Houston, in Deer Park, LaPorte, Pasadena, thinking about how we improve our own communities, maybe there's inspiration here. Could focusing on our own local planning processes, creating clearer rules, and building consensus on a vision unlock new potential here?
It definitely poses a question, doesn't it? Could a framework like New Rochelle's, maybe adapted for our own context, help us address specific local challenges or opportunities? Could it empower us to think and act locally more effectively by changing the system itself?
Something to consider. That idea of abstracting the vision first, getting buy-in on the big picture before fighting over every detail, is compelling. If you want to read more, the source material came from the Better Cities Project. Their website is better-cities.org.
Lots to chew on there.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.